What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Built on Purpose podcast, where each episode I interview exceptional leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, philosophers, and some straight up interesting people to explore their outlook on life, work, and leadership. My name is Brian Moore, co-founder and managing partner of Wise Scouts, and today I'm interviewing Brett Hurt, the co-founder and CEO of data.world. To say Brett has accomplished a lot at a relatively young age would be an understatement, and a really big one at that. Brett's been a part of launching 5 startups and, with the help of 3 co-founders, has just launched his 6th. Brett grew up in a household of entrepreneurs. His dad was the inventor of the first ever halogen fishing light. At age 7, Brett was given his first computer and began programming. This was the beginning of what would become a lifelong pursuit of Brett seeking to understand how things work. Between ages 7 and 21, Brett spent close to 40 hours every week programming. He credits his parents, in particular his mom, with supporting him and helping him find his true passion. This passion led him to the co-founding of Bazaarvoice, where he served as the president and CEO for 7.5 years, and the eventual IPO in 2012, which, by the way, was rated one of the top 5 IPOs in that year by the Wall Street Journal. Brett's current project, data.world, is squarely focused on building the most meaningful, collaborative, and abundant data resource in the world. Pretty big stuff. This episode is full of meaningful life lessons and a series of great stories everyone will appreciate. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Brett Hurt. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Built on Purpose podcast. And I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Brett Hurt today. Brett, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's a real honor to be on your program.
Well, it's an honor to have you, my friend. And I want to start with a quote, and it's a quote that I know is going to resonate quite a bit with you. Abraham Lincoln once said, "There is just one way to bring up a child in the way he should go, and that is to travel that way yourself." And I share that quote because you were born into a family of entrepreneurs, truly. In fact, your dad was the inventor of the first halogen fishing light. Tell me and tell our audience, what was it like growing up in a household of entrepreneurship and invention? What was it like being surrounded by that?
It was incredibly cool, and I love that quote. I'm so glad you started with that quote. I don't know if you realize this, but when I started data.world, I put a blog post out on lucky7.io, and I actually quoted Abraham Lincoln with that exact same quote. And the impression I wanted to have on our children in starting this business very much was aligned with what Abraham Lincoln said with that. But just to get back to your question, it was an incredible experience growing up in an entrepreneurial household. You don't realize it at the time how much you're actually learning by working with your father and mother. They also had furniture stores that I would go to and work at, and it just seemed kind of, I was just brought up to kind of intuitively understand the customer and how they service the customer better, and ask the customer questions about how they found us, and help them navigate through the store more efficiently, and also do the hard work of just sweeping the floors and having dust attacks as it infiltrated my nose, and that hard labor too. It's something that you never forget as a child, and I'm frequently commented on by employees at the various startups I've founded as, "Man, you're willing to do everything." It's like, well, I was kind of raised that way. But I remember, the thing that I remember the most is that my friends were kind of jealous of my parents. And I didn't entirely understand it because, they're my parents. I took them for granted as a child, and it was kind of all I knew. But what I realized as an adult was that what my friends were jealous about is that my parents truly enjoyed their work. And they were jealous about the fact that their parents, they heard kind of complaining about their jobs. And they were like, your dad is so cool and your mom is so cool. It's clear they really love what they do. And that kind of impression, really settles in with a child. Sometimes that seed takes a long time to express. It expressed for me into adulthood, but that left a huge mark on me that no matter what I do in life, I should do something that I'm truly passionate about, or why do it at all? And there's so many programs that kind of make fun of work. There's The Office, there's Silicon Valley, there's, the movie Office Space, and these are all, great fun, but they're a real tragedy if actually a lot of people look at their work in that way.
Well, yeah, and I mean, especially given the fact that the data, which no pun, actually every pun intended, because I know we're going to talk about data here a little bit later during our conversation, that the data certainly shows that we end up spending a good 3/4 of our adult lives at this thing we call work, and for it to be anything other than meaningful seems like an incredible waste of an opportunity.
Yes, it is. And, you only live once. And so why not really make it count? We're put on this earth to hopefully do great things. And I find it to be a real tragedy that so many people hate their work. And that's just no way to live. And that's no way to bring up a child either. Because your children are paying attention. I paid attention to my parents, and I kind of have, quote unquote, innate entrepreneurial skills, but they're innate because of the fact that I grew up in that environment. I naturally understood the environment because it was a part of who I was since I was born. And, I will forever thank my parents for that, because it's helped me tremendously as an entrepreneur to fall back on some of those lessons learned. And my parents were, in fact, some of the most important mentors I've ever had entrepreneurially after I became an adult. I very much miss them. It's very sad that they both passed away.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I read that your dad back in 2008 and your mom here, about a year or so ago? Not too terribly long ago.
My mom was a little bit over 4 years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw 2015 somewhere. My apologies.
No problem. I miss her a lot. She was an incredible woman. Actually, my blog, lucky7.io, is named as a tribute to her. You can read that tribute online.
I'll definitely check it out. I'm curious. I don't want to leave the childhood and the impact that your folks had just yet. Was there a certain point in your life where you just knew you were destined to follow in their footsteps and be an entrepreneur? Was there a particular moment, or was it just a gradual combination, sort of a combinatorial effect of just the way you were raised?
Well, I think it's both. So it was a combinatorial effect of the way I was raised. If I trace back to my early roots, I started programming when I was 7 years old. My mom, when she first got me the Pong game, which back then was its own console. I don't know if you remember that, but it was its own console.
I certainly do.
And well, she could tell as a kid that I was really interested in how it worked. I wasn't just content playing the game. I was maybe 4 years old then. I was really interested in, like, how does electronics work? How does this actually happen? How does this magic come to life? And so when I was 7, she read an article about the computer age being here, and Atari had come out with one of the first personal computers, and she bought that for me because she thought that it would make me interested in mathematics. My grandfather taught at UT Austin in mathematics for over 35 years. That was his whole career. And my mom had majored in math as well as accounting. And so she thought that this would really light me up. And she was right, but I I don't think she ever anticipated how right she was. I mean, I then programmed over 40 hours a week from age 7 to 21. And my mom needed to have kind of this superhuman discipline to keep everybody out of my way. Because you think about all the pressures of childhood, like you should be outside playing, you should be doing this and that, and, you know, in this activity and that activity. And, you know, one of my teachers, I think it was my second grade teacher, took my mom aside one time and told her that I was going to be a loser in life. She told her that I was hopelessly lost, that all I did was play computers or talk about computers, and that's all I was going to know, and that she was really concerned about me. And it really offended my mom. My mom, by the way, didn't tell me that story until I was an adult and I had already become successful. So, you know, this passion for technology and how technology would change the world was really embedded from a very young age. And I'll forever thank my mom for sitting down with me, you know, learning how to program with me, and giving me that gift of finding my passion. That's one of the most important jobs a parent has, is to help a child find out what they're truly passionate about in life, and then let them do it with no judgment, no matter what societal pressures come along. You know, not obviously, that's, you know, there are certain caveats there. I mean, I'm talking about do something that, you know, looks like it'll be productive. You know, well, anyways, we could get off on a tangent there, but there's a lot of judgment there in parenting that's very, very important. And my mom had that judgment to realize that this could be the wave of the future, and that I was interested in something that truly could be, you know, game changing. But then, you know, I having that kind of childhood, I didn't feel super comfortable interacting with lots of people. And I realized that I wanted to go into business. When I was in undergrad, I worked for Accenture full time for my junior and senior year. Back then it was called Anderson Consulting. That was very unusual. And the way I got that job, by the way, was very karmic. It was because when I was 10 years old, I helped an older kid who was 18 set up his first bulletin board system. And he remembered that and called me as an adult to say, hey, are you still into computers? I may have a job for you here at Anderson Consulting. And I was like, well, I'm in college, and, you know, at UT Austin. He's like, that's okay. Come work for us. You know, you could do it while you're in school. And I did. And then I really seriously thought about starting my own business with one of my best friends straight out of undergrad, but I just didn't feel quite ready. You know, I'd gained some people interaction skills and things like that at Accenture. I just didn't feel quite ready. And I went to go work for Deloitte & Touche Consulting Group. And that firm was very good to me, and I performed very well there. But about a year into it, I felt very disappointed in myself. And I felt like, you know what, I was more ready than I gave myself credit for. And, you know, now's the time. And so I decided to become an entrepreneur then, and I was looking for a path to become one. And Deloitte had this program where they would pay for your MBA as long as you got into a top school. And I got into the Wharton School and convinced them to pay for my MBA, which was unusual. I was actually the first systems analyst in Deloitte & Touche's history that convinced them to pay for it. They usually did it for the business analyst. And I wrote all of my essays about how at Wharton I would launch my first business. And I actually launched 4 businesses while I was at Wharton, and worked regularly till 3, 4 in the morning, just kind of insane hours. I had unlimited energy back then, and really established myself as an entrepreneur, and never went back to Deloitte. They never paid for my MBA because I never went back. They would only pay if you went back for a period of 3 years.
And the rest of the story is unfolded from there. One of the things
And
that,
the rest of the story's unfolded from there. Yep.
yeah. One of the things that I know was a really interesting lesson that you learned early on, in particular, I believe this came from your dad, revolves around a story about Walmart. And Walmart came knocking and wanted to put a lot of what your dad was working on in their stores. Can you share that Walmart story and the impact it's had?
Well, it's an interesting story for quite a few reasons. So let me tell you the story and then the analysis of it, because the analysis has changed as I've become older. Like so many lessons you learn from parents, it takes a while to really settle in. I went through the rebellious teenage phase like anybody. So my dad, when I was 10 years old, and I actually remember so fondly like working on the labels for the fishing lights with him, and really learning about direct marketing with him, and it was very cool, very very cool experience. And I would even visit some of the retail stores that he sold the fishing lights in, and just the way people interacted with him there. It was clear that he was very well respected in that industry. And when I was 10 years old, he was approached by Walmart to sell his products. He had more than fishing lights, but they were all fishing related products, to sell his products in all the Walmart stores nationwide. And he told them no. And I just couldn't believe it. I was so, I just couldn't understand like why he wouldn't take that opportunity to really go big. He was comfortable, but that would have been the chance to become a really big company. And I was angry. I mean, I was really angry at him. And I remember that he sat me down at a small table, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Son, you may realize the value of keeping life simple one day, or you may not. That's your choice." And I still was upset, right? But he just didn't want to take on the growth of having big factories and really ramping up production. He was comfortable. When I was reading The 4-Hour Work Week many, many, many years later by Tim Ferriss, there's this great story about this Harvard Business MBA who's working at a very high pressure job, I think on Wall Street, who just needs to get away for a while. And he goes to Mexico and he goes fishing, and he's standing next to a fisherman one day on this beautiful, coastline. And the fisherman says, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he's like struck by the fact that, the fisherman has, good English and, appears to be, pretty well educated. And so he strikes up this conversation. He's like, "Well, how many of these fish are you catching every day?" And he's like, "Well, just enough to feed my family. And I also catch a few more for our neighbors." And he's like, "Well, this is your lucky day. You and I are going to go into business together. I'll be the CEO of the company, and we're going to sell this fish all over the place." And the guy says, "And then what?" And he says, "Well, we'll build a big company together." And the guy says, "And then what?" And he says, "Well, we'll take that company public and we'll make a lot of money." And the guy says, "And then what?" And he said, "Well, then we can retire and, go, fish every day on some beautiful coastline." And so my dad was that guy. Okay. He knew what he wanted in life. And he was literally that guy. He would catch enough red snapper on his fishing trips, and I went on quite a few with him, and then give them away to neighbors. I mean, I remember my mom saying, "Brian, you are so generous. Like, what are you doing?" He would give away like 90% of his fish. And he would not just give it away, he would clean the fish for them. He would turn it into fillets where it was like ready to be cooked. and spend, just hours and hours outside doing that kind of work. Well, later on in life, I became much more successful than my parents, at least financially speaking. And my dad would joke with me, and he would say, "Son, you never did get that lesson, did you?" And we'd start laughing, and I would say, "Well, Dad, you know what my problem is?" And he would say, "Yep, you're too damn ambitious." And then we'd laugh some more. So, I can't. It took me a while to really understand that lesson. And in between taking Bazaarvoice public and taking, 3 years to do startup investing and really just travel the world, I went back into the arena with data.world to build what will be my most ambitious business today. And part of the reason I took that 3 years in between is I wanted to experience life as my parents experienced life. I wanted to see what it was like to be that fisherman. And what I realized is that I am wired to be ambitious. I am wired to change the world through technology, and that too should be honored. That too is okay. And a huge part of the reason that I started this business was for our children. And I've written about that story and happy to talk about that story. But, I really was, just to be really candid with you, caught a little bit in a funk after losing both my parents and having this time where I had made enough money where I didn't need to work anymore. And I had the freedom of complete choice. And what did I choose to do after 3 years? I chose to go back into the arena with something even more ambitious than anything prior. But I feel very at peace with that because at least I went through the journey to understand what their life was like and to conclude that there are many pros of their life, but it's just not me. It's just not who I'm wired to be. I even had a long walk with a friend talking about this, and he looked at me and in a way liberated me, and he said, "Brett, just because that was right for your parents doesn't mean that it's right for you. You're different people. I know you came from them, but you're different. You're a different person than they are, and you should honor the person that you are and the gifts that you have and the drive that you have. There's nothing wrong with that." And that conversation was one of many seeds planted that got me to go back into the arena, and I'm having an absolute blast. And I think my parents, if they were alive today, would be very proud of the fact that I went through that journey, saw what their life was like, and ultimately concluded that basically the way I had been living was pretty much the right way for who I am. But maybe I have more wisdom and perspective than I did back then.
I wonder too if, and I know you've written about this quite a bit, that even during all of the businesses that you've launched as they were in their high growth phases, IPO phases, and just all of the different ins and outs of you being a CEO, that you have always preached the importance, not only preached it, but you've led by example of reflection time and really taking a good 4, 5, 6, sometimes up to 10 weeks off for vacation throughout the year and really reflection time throughout the year. So I wonder if that perhaps that lesson of your dad's words of, maybe you'll figure out keeping life simple, maybe you won't, if that's that piece of advice sort of ringing through your life in how important it is for you to continue that reflection time every year.
Yeah, I do believe that that's one of the ways I incorporated that lesson. Another way I incorporated it is, for me, it's just absolutely non-negotiable. No matter what I do in life, it's non-negotiable that I must be there for our children's most important moments. My parents, I realized as an adult were really your classic lifestyle entrepreneurs. I meet lifestyle entrepreneurs all the time now. And they have good businesses. They're not going to change the world in a huge way, but they're changing the world in a small way. They're doing something good for society. And they ultimately have an abundance of time with their family and whatnot. I mean, you look at someone like Elon Musk, for example, who is, the founder of 3 companies simultaneously that are all like dramatically changing the world. I'm sitting in one of his products right now. I'm sitting in a Tesla as we have this conversation, which is my favorite car by far now. And he's had a pretty challenging personal life. I don't know him personally. He also went to Wharton. That's the only connection that we have in common. But he's had, he's been divorced before. I think he remarried his longtime wife. But I'm sure that he works very, very, very hard. There's lots of literature out there about how hard he works. But that's right for him. And thank God it's right for him. I mean, look at how much that guy is going to change the world, is changing the world. He's kind of the ultimate expression of an entrepreneur that can change the world. And so, I choose to have some limits, and my limits are that no matter what's going on, I've got to be there for my children's most important moments. I just have to be. I've been married 20 years. That's incredibly important to me. It's a huge part of who I am. And I have to be there for those moments. And I have to have that reflection time as well, because that reflection time to me is what strengthens me as a leader. I find that's incredibly important to really understand what I've learned and be able to apply that. And, that 3 years that I had right before this journey with data.world was an incredible period of reflection time and strengthening time. And sometimes you need to go through, I think, periods like that to realize what you've learned and then reapply it over and over again. And it's just, there's just too many people, I think, that put massive pressure on themselves to say, I'm the CEO of a startup, and therefore I should work nonstop and not take time for themselves. Their marriage could fall apart. Their physical health could fall apart. Their friendships could fall apart. And, I can understand like being passionate about what you're doing, and hopefully all entrepreneurs are passionate about what they're doing. We know that's not true, but that's my hope for all entrepreneurs. But if they don't take that time, I would actually argue that they'll create a worse company, because companies are so often a reflection of the leaders at the top. And if the leader at the top isn't someone who's mentally balanced, who's really reflective and has learned and solidified those learnings, then you're going to have a whole company that's running around like chickens with their heads cut off.
Do you think we're finally reaching a time and a place in the business world where the narcissistic, very ego-driven leader will become more of an anomaly than what certainly has been, at least up till now, the norm in business?
I think so. And I think it's a challenging question to ask with the Trump election just now behind us, because Trump in so many ways is a reflection of a very egotistical leader who said a lot of things that people thought would have disqualified him from the election. And so you asking me that question strikes a chord, and I want to speak about that elephant in the room, because anybody listening to this is going to listen to my answer in the context of what just happened. So here's the thing. I think, first of all, we can read way too much into the election of Trump. Okay, let me just give you a few things. I think it's been since the 1940s that there's never been a Democrat or Republican president that's been in office more than 2 terms. That the party swings back and forth, from Republican to Democrat. That just happens as a natural cycle. So Hillary Clinton would have needed to break that mold. Secondly, I think, now with the benefit of hindsight, it's pretty clear that there were some problems with the way Hillary Clinton campaigned in some of the battleground states. And I did vote for Clinton. Thirdly, she had to toe the party line because, Obama, she needed Obama's support. She had lost to Obama before. Obama's approval ratings were very high. So she had to be the establishment candidate. She was kind of boxed in. She couldn't be a change candidate. And the irony of that is Obama ran on a change platform, and change platforms are much more energizing to the voter base than not. Fourthly, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. Yes, there's lots of nuance to that. We just put out a data set on data.world from Gary Hoover. Gary Hoover is the founder of Hoover's, which is bought by Dun & Bradstreet. He's one of the most data-driven people in the world. It does show that there's a lot of nuance in the way that Trump won. Like, for example, like the media is saying it's a rural versus a metro thing. It's actually not entirely accurate, because you wouldn't count Long Island, for example, as rural, and there's only 2.2% of our country are farmers. Or in the farming industry, and in Long Island, Trump actually won by 57%. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and that election data set kind of gives you the definitive view of the fact that there were some pretty sizable cities which Trump still won in, even though those cities had low unemployment and were thriving. Were very well-educated cities and whatnot. So, so let me just address the question. I do very much believe that we're becoming much more conscious as leaders. I really believe that. I believe that we're becoming much more moral, much more ethical. There's many more mirrors being held up with social media and whatnot that are forcing leaders to reconcile with their public persona to a much greater degree than in the past, where things literally could happen in the back rooms with scotch and cigars. We're a long way past that. Doesn't mean that we're perfect. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be some shocks along the way to the system. But, things like meditation, yoga, all these things are at an all-time high. I think people are much more reflective than they've ever been. I think this election itself is a galvanizing force. Another problem with the election is that there were a lot of Democrats that didn't vote, tons and tons of Democrats that didn't vote. I myself am an independent, by the way. I'm not either a Democrat or a Republican. I truly vote for whoever I think the country needs at that point in time. So anyways, long story short, I very much believe that leaders are becoming more reflective, and that we are on this journey, this very conscious journey where we are all becoming better and better leaders, and people are demanding better and better leadership out of those that lead. It's becoming much more accountable.
I mean, it is.
I know that's a long ramble, Brian, but I feel like that context is super important. There's a lot of people confused by this election and saying, well, if Trump can get elected, then, how conscious are we becoming? It's much more nuanced than that.
No, I would agree with that. It is really interesting, though. And I hadn't thought about, at least for purposes of our conversation, Trump's win in the presidential election as, frankly, at least my perception, and I believe you agree, the opposite of leaders becoming less narcissistic and less ego driven. I mean, the way he positions himself certainly would have me believe that he is a leader much more akin to the way the world used to work and the way leadership was held on a pedestal than the more collaborative,
Right.
vulnerable, always learning, working to become more conscious leader that I think is the world we're heading into today, or are already in, and hopefully it will become the majority at some point. So I think it's a great point, and by no means does the presidential election necessarily serve as a representation for the way the business world is operating. But it's an interesting point. It's a really interesting point. I do want to talk about data.world, and I actually want to read a quote. And I'm not sure if this quote came from the data.world website or if I saw it in an article, but I just love it. And I want to use it to kick off the data.world discussion here. And that is, if the universe of data were suddenly made available, it would unleash the creativity of problem solvers to combine different data sets, public and private, to develop innovative solutions to innumerable challenges. So that said, what exactly is data.world, Brett?
Yeah, so that quote was on our website when we were in stealth mode, and that's all you could see for around 6 months until we launched our platform on July 11th. And data.world is basically a project that in many ways the world has been gearing up for, but a lot of things need to come into play. So what it is it's a social network for people that love data to be able to share the data sets they love so that they can work more effectively on them with other people in the public as well as with their teams. And it's, at the end of the day, we're creating the most meaningful, the most abundant, and the most collaborative data resource in history. That's a very, very ambitious goal, okay? And we're doing it as a public benefit corporation. And that's the first time that I've founded a public benefit corporation. And, the other nomenclature for this is a B Corp, and we're a certified B Corp as well. But the reason I say that it's been in the making for a long time is you need to get to the point where storage cost and processing cost have fallen to the point where you could build something this ambitious. You also need to get to a point in the world where there are a lot of examples of the power of collaboration. And one of the best examples of that in the technology space is GitHub. GitHub now has over 14 million programmers from all around the world that are collaborating and sharing open source code. And it's become a force multiplier for people in the programming industry to the point where if you're a programmer, a lot of times you'll just share your GitHub link, your GitHub profile with a potential employer to show your work, show how much you've been collaborating out in the open, show the quality of the code that you've written. And I think it's moved the entire bell curve of programming to the right. It's made all programmers better because you have access to the Library of Alexandria of code and all the people that work on that code in one place. Strangely enough, that doesn't exist in the world of data until data.world. And it makes no sense because we're living here in this networked age. We have access to instant information in so many ways, but that isn't true with regards to data. You can have these major breakthroughs. I was reading recently about a study out of a university where they showed that minority board members are definitively undercompensated. It was around a 30-year public company study. Well, that meets the headlines. It makes the headlines in the New York Times or whatnot. But what if someone wanted to work on that data? Where do they go? And the reality is it'd be very hard. You'd have to track down those professors. Maybe they have it in a format where you could work on it. Maybe they have it well documented. Maybe they don't. But how many people are going to actually do that? And it would be incredibly useful to be able to slice that data state by state. If you were campaigning in a state to get affirmative action laws changed or anything of that nature, having that data available would be incredibly powerful to you. But yet there's so many of these well-funded projects that make the headlines and then they die on the vine. And so the world that we're living in today is largely siloed when it comes to data, and that's an artifact of the past. And that's something that we're very much going to change with this company. And this company literally pulled me in mission-wise. I mean, it literally was something where I got so passionate about it when we were brainstorming that I felt like I must do this. This is so important for the world that this is something that must happen. And I very much envision data.world being the company that, my children use in college. And they asked me one day, "Hey Dad, what was it like before data.world?" And I'll have to explain how you had to email people and maybe they would send you the data on a thumb drive, and you couldn't tell how other people were working with the data. You couldn't tell how people were collaborating, and it was such a more difficult world to operate in. But once we get all of this data in one place, as the quote says, both public and private, it's going to create an enormous opportunity to solve the world's problems, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate change, whatever you can imagine, cancer, all of that will be something that you can eventually address inside of data.world. And then everybody will be able to see how you addressed it and be able to create derivative work on top of it. It really will accelerate our overall progress in humanity, much the way that GitHub has accelerated overall IP development through making just an incredible social collaboration platform around code.
What's also just incredibly interesting to me about this work that you and your team at data.world are doing is the impact that it will have on the way people find the organizations or companies that they may eventually work for, because it sounds as if there's an opportunity for these data sets, which are obviously all revolving around challenges and problems and issues that need to be solved, that companies may start to form around these data sets, and people are going to come together who would otherwise not know one another because there's a draw of these data sets that are pulling them to say, hey, this is a particular problem or challenge the world faces that I'd like to work on. And what may be a wonderful unintended, maybe intended, but unintended consequence positive from this is people starting companies around these data sets because they're being pulled together from different parts of the world or different parts of the US to work on it. It could be a pretty amazing byproduct of this.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And one of the brainstorms that we had as founders when we were deciding what business actually to launch is that we were talking about the future of work, and we're talking exactly like you're talking right now about how, what would change if all of the world's most important data was out there visible where you could really work on it and see how other people are working on it. And we talked about exactly that it would form new companies, that, foundations would be far more efficient in solving problems, that, it'd be the ultimate base for AI and machine learning to work from. If we're going to get to that Star Trek future where, Captain Picard can call up to the computer and the computer can give any answer to any question, we're going to get there through a large public works project where people get the data in a very accessible place and format, and very well documented, so that AI and machine learning can understand it in the first place. We're not going to get there through data being largely walled off and in silos and a lot of proprietary knowledge to be able to understand how to work with it, because it's not well documented and people have moved on to other projects. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You've got to have people codify the data to be able to get to that future of abundance.
You as you were giving a little bit of the backstory of data.world, you glazed over it because I know it's so core to who you are, at least in the interactions I've had with you, that you set up data.world as a public benefit corporation. There's a lot of folks who are still unaware of what that actually means. So a couple things. One, why did you do that? And what has it meant for you?
So there were several reasons why. I mean, one, the broadness of what we're doing and the importance of what we're doing needed to be protected for the long term. And the beautiful thing about a public benefit corporation is it's got all the advantages of a C corporation. And some people think it's a nonprofit, or it's not. It's got all the same advantages of C corporation. They can go public just like a C corporation. VCs can back them just like a C corporation. It has all the same transparency of a C corporation, same reporting requirements with SEC if you go public, et cetera, et cetera. What the C corporation lacks, and I love the fact that, Brian, you and I were at the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit together, and John Mackey on stage said that if he started a business today, he would start it as a public benefit corporation. That was super cool moment for me because John Mackey was one of our first investors here. And I have educated John Mackey quite a bit on why this is so important. I mean, clearly he's a well-educated guy and an incredible mentor, but I've really educated him on why being a public benefit corporation is so important for data.world. And with a public benefit corporation, you do have additional requirements, and those additional requirements are that board members must always consider the public mission, and the public mission is publicly shared. As a public benefit corporation, you need to report on how you're fulfilling that public mission, and that always should be shared. And recently, we've written a letter. I wrote this letter that goes to all of our users when they come on board. And the responses I get back from that letter to new users, where I describe why we're a public benefit corporation and why it matters, is just awesome. I mean, it's incredibly awesome to see the way that people react to that. And, it's opened up tons of doors for us. It's opened up doors with government. It's opened up doors with universities. It's opened up doors with foundations. At the end of the day, you can be a very conscious and soulful C corporation. This is not a railing against C corporations by any stretch. But the question should be, why would you not be a public benefit corporation versus why should you be? There's no downside. There's only upside. Society is going to relate to a mission like this much more effectively if you set up that different and better way of incorporating. So why would you not do it? It's just, that's the question we should be asking. And I've got a great FAQ that I can send you that you could include as a reading resource in this podcast that anybody could read. It's put out by B Labs, which is the leading nonprofit that certifies B corporations. We recently got certified by them. But it really explains all the pros, and there's just no downside.
It's great to hear. And in particular, I remember back, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was probably closer to 4 or 5, when I read the Conscious Capitalism book that John and Raj wrote together, that in the back of the book, there was a section, I believe it was, in sort of the footnotes or an appendix section that particularly addressed B Corps. And it appeared pretty clearly that the author's point of view was that it's not necessary. And to hear that, John, and I was there with you to get up on stage and particularly say if he were to start a brand new organization today, he would do it that way, is quite the 180 from the position in the book. And so it's great to hear that more and more support is building for the public benefit corporation movement.
Yeah, I agree. And, we're all on this journey of constantly learning, and even someone as iconic and amazing as John Mackey, can also learn through others' actions. And I think that he would say, if he was on this podcast, that he has learned a lot about public benefit corporations through backing us as a startup and getting closer to it and seeing the advantages. I send out an investor update literally every single week, and it's been very clear that being a public benefit corporation has not only helped us win lots of users over to data.world, but it's also helped us win lots and lots of partnerships in government with universities and the like.
So, just to wrap, at least on the data.world piece, and then if you have time, I have one other area that I'd love to get into, but I want to be respectful. But to wrap on the data.world piece for our audience, for those that have yet to visit, first and foremost, go to data.world. That's the URL, pretty darn easy. Again, data.world. For the folks out there that haven't been there yet, Brett, and are curious, someone like me, what exactly is the best way to engage with what's happening at data.world right now, especially if our sort of natural orientation is not one of a data scientist or a researcher?
Yeah, so you don't have to be a data scientist or a researcher, although clearly we have lots of features for that population. You could be a business analyst, you could be a statistician, you could be someone who just is very interested in the underlying data to put into Excel and work with it there for your particular state. So to answer your question, I would recommend that people watch the 2-minute video that's on the data.world homepage to just understand what it's about. And then when you sign up, go in and look for some of the organizations that you care about, whether it's NASA or it's your city. You want to see what government your city's putting out, or you care about census data, and U.S. Census has been an early partner of ours, or your university. Go in there and look for some of those organizations and follow them. Go look for data sets that you may be interested in. Maybe your cause is cancer or whatnot, and go out there and look at that. And what you'll do is you'll start to see more and more functionality come out every week. Every week we're launching a tremendous amount of functionality that addresses your needs as you interact with the system. We're incredibly metrics driven. Every day we look at metrics and have a metric stand-up meeting and discuss how we're evolving our solution. But I would encourage you to poke around and start to engage with it. Maybe you come in not to download data at all, but you come in just to have discussion about the data. Like when we launched with the ADL, with Anti-Defamation League, they announced a historic partnership with us at a first of its kind event called Never Is Now, because they've seen this huge increase in hate crimes ever since the presidential election. There's some pretty bad actors out there that are using the election to basically propagate hate crimes, and it's pretty unprecedented. They haven't seen an increase like this in decades. Well, the ADL wanted to call attention to that data and combine it with the FBI's data on hate crimes. That's now available at data.world/ADL. That may be a cause that you're interested in, and you may not have the skills to analyze that data today. So you jump into a discussion and ask questions, and then other people that are analyzing the data can give you the answers to those questions. But there's some pretty intuitive stuff in data.world that has launched in the past few weeks, where it makes it very easy to create your own visualization, very easy to plug it into whatever system you like to use for analytics. So there's quite a bit there, even for the more novice user today.
So if we do have time, I'd love to touch on one additional topic. How we doing on time?
We're doing great.
Fantastic. So in 2015, you were invited and delivered at the University of Texas Masters of Science in Technology Commercialization. You delivered the commencement speech. And so first and foremost, congratulations on doing that, Brett. Um,
Thank you. That was an honor. Thank you.
I bet. One of the key messages, there were several, maybe not so much the key message, but there was a particular focus of the speech. And you said that this is the golden age of technology, that the time we're living in right now is the golden age of technology. What did you mean by that?
Well, there's a brilliant book written by an author, Peter Diamandis, called Abundance. And if you haven't read that book, that's a must read. And I wrote the longest book review of any book I've ever read on Lucky7.io. It's called An Abundantly Long Review of the Book Abundance.
How appropriate.
And what I meant by that is that you have, it's one thing when I was a kid and technology was regulated to Pong and then early computers and affected very few people. Now technology affects everything, and we're going to be shaping the physical world, both our bodies, as well as our minds, as well as the physical world that you see all around you. We're going to be shaping that in an exponential way through the use of technology in our lifetimes. I mean, this is the most exciting time to be alive. It is very possible in our lifetimes that we're going to eradicate almost all disease. It's very possible. As processing power goes up, as storage, capacity goes up, it makes it easier and easier to solve almost any problem you can imagine. Again, hard for people to think about maybe right now, if they're, disgruntled about the election or whatnot. But in every measure, almost that you can think of, the world is getting better. We're eradicating poverty at a faster pace than ever before. We're eradicating hunger at a faster pace than ever before. There's still lots and lots of stuff to be depressed about in the world, whether it's Syria or any, or some other pretty dire circumstances. But if you look at it in the aggregate, we are living in the golden age of technology. Technology has always been what's progressed humanity. I mean, if it wasn't for technology, we would all be farming today and breaking our backs out there in the field just to stay alive. The Industrial Revolution really led to a revolution in the way we sourced food, which led to a revolution in the way we addressed hunger throughout the world and those that were starving. But we now live in an age where we're going to be able to genetically engineer food very shortly, to grow our meat instead of literally slaughter animals to source our meat, where we can just grow it in a vat type of process where it's much more safe than eating it from an animal that may be in proximity with disease. Goodbye things like mad cow disease and things like that. We're going to be able to shape the physical environment where literally, it's almost a video game like, in that you could build something from a nanoscale into a physical structure. It's going to revolutionize the way we do construction. In every single dimension you can imagine, technology is going to massively improve our lives. Now, what we need to be mindful of is that, there is a lot of truth to this election just kind of hacked our primal brains because there was a lot of spreading of fake news. That's just proven, right? Facebook is now on the case and addressing that there are a lot of people in Eastern Europe that were hacking kind of our primal instincts with fake news, which got shared and definitely had a effect in this election. So there are going to be counterbalancing trends here, but overall in the aggregate, things are going to get much better. But as leaders, we're going to have to get even more mindful. We're going to have to get even more reflective. We're going to have the ability to unplug occasionally and really reflect on what we've learned. And that's going to get harder and harder as Wi-Fi is everywhere and social's everywhere, and you can constantly just be plugged in a very surface level instead of looking at things in a very deep level. So I predict that things like meditation, yoga will be even more on the rise. There will be a lot more counterbalancing mindfulness practices that come along, and then eventually we'll merge with the machines, and it'll, your memory will be extended by computing power and storage power. Just kind of anything you can imagine, from science fiction is going to happen. And I don't believe that it's going to be dystopian. I believe that human beings are wired to be much more positive than we get credit for. There's much more positive happening constantly in the world than the 24/7 news media cycle would lead you to believe. If you just take your own experiences and kind of open your eyes and really look around for graciousness and love and all those great human characteristics that are out there in abundance if you look for them. So it's going to be a wild time. I mean, we're living in the most amazing period in history, and we saw how much the Industrial Revolution changed the world. Well, imagine all physical objects being transformed, being internet connected. Imagine the physical environment being shaped by nanotechnology. Imagine your food being grown instead of animal slaughtered. Imagine like almost anything you can think of to live a more comfortable and meaningful life, and it's going to be there, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen in our lifetime.
It is fascinating to think about, and I know one particular data point that that I'm fascinated by is the increase, the expected major increase in life expectancy as we continue to push forward and eradicate some of these diseases. We've already seen a massive increase in life expectancy, and so the impact that that's going to have on our work and what we choose to do as we get older in life, and this concept of retirement that I think is going to age out here before too long, that if people start retiring at 50 or 60 or 70 and you're going to live to 110, 120, what are you going to do? The concept of retirement is going to change drastically. And so as a result, drastically. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating thought. And certainly there are a lot of really, really smart people who are focused on that. So,
one thing that never changes, Brian, that is the universal truth, is that at the end of the day, the meaning to life is a life of meaning. Like if you read any religious text, any philosophical text, it's all getting to that same root.
Yep.
And so even if our life expectancy increases to 200 years, let's say, I don't think that'll happen necessarily in our lifetime, but it may increase to 150 years at some point in our lifetime, and you're in my lifetime. What will happen in that world, I think, is people will reinvent themselves, and it may be normal to have 4 or 5 careers in your lifetime versus 1 or 2. And that's going to be beautiful. I mean, that I think that's going to be a very beautiful thing that happens. And by the way, the expectation is that if you can live to 150, that we've already figured out how to regenerate, massive components of your body and brain to be able to very comfortably live to that age.
Right.
But yeah, all these things we're going to have to grapple with in our lifetime, and it's gonna be really interesting how we grapple with them with society. But I'm very confident that we'll figure it out in a good way, and that good always prevails when it comes to human beings in the end.
Amen to that. I think that's the best place to at least wrap for now. I could go on and on. I'll tell you, there was a few other topics I would have loved to have touched on. Your Henry Crown Fellowship, your deep, deep and passionate commitment to the city of Austin. I would have loved to touch on Bazaarvoice, even though I know it's an accomplishment of the past. I think it's an incredibly worthy one that's worth touching on. So I have a feeling we're going to have to do a part 2 here in the not too distant future. So, Brett, what a wonderful time spent. Great conversation. Can't thank you enough for spending the time you did with me. I wish you and your family a fantastic, happy, healthy holiday season. And I have a feeling we're going to have a part 2 on the books here in 2017.
Well, that'd be a lot of fun, Brian, and thanks again. And it's a real pleasure to serve with you on the board of Conscious Capitalism, and right back at you with those kind words.
Well, thanks.
You have a great holiday.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and best of luck with data.world, and we'll be chatting soon.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. I hope you enjoyed hearing our interview with Brett. If you're interested in a transcribed version of this show or want to listen to more episodes of the Built on Purpose podcast, please visit yscouts.com/podcast. If you'd like to recommend someone as a guest for the show, please drop me a line at brian@yscouts.com. I promise more great interviews are on the way. Thanks again for listening.